Welcome back, everybody, for session number 2. Um, and let me jump in with review. I'm a big one into review, and over the last 2 or 3 years, I've learned how to use PowerPoint. So anytime I can use a PowerPoint, I'm happy. So this is our starting point. And what we said last week is that we were going to ask the questions that the mystics asked. The first was, how does a mystic see the world? The second was, what's God like? The third was, how do I commune with God? And then how did God create the world? That's what we did last week. And we talked about the country mouse and the city mouse. And the 2 mice go out to the field out of the city, and they see what is a farmer. They don't know it's a farmer, making fallows and then throwing in seed. And the city mouse gets all upset that they're wasting this, goes back to the city. The country mouse stays and sees that grain grows, and then eventually it's harvested to wheat and bread. And so that idea is that is looking at the big picture and the interconnectedness of the world. And so the city mouse that only was looking at one snapshot only saw a little bit. But the country mouse had the larger perspective. At the same time, you may be thinking now that all of mysticism can be found in children's books. That may be the case. But as a story by the Yiddish writer I.L. Peretz, who talked about the Rabbi of Nimrov. And the legend was that he would go to the heavens right before Rosh Hashanah, when the congregation was saying its morning slichot prayers. And we learned that instead of going to heaven, he was dressing up as a peasant, and that there was a skeptic, a Litvak, who said not even Moses went to heaven, who followed the rabbi and sees that while he is dressed as a peasant, he's actually cutting wood for an elderly person who couldn't provide, and building a fire in this person's home. And then when asked, where did the rabbi go, if not higher? So that is the mystic, holding 2 ideas in tension at the same time. And that's the difference between mysticism and some forms of philosophy. If you're making an argument, A leads to B leads to C. But if you are talking religion, you can hold 2 ideas in conflict. Think of an adolescent, it's usually the behavior more of girls than boys, who says in the same breath, mom, which in 1 minute can be, how dare you embarrass me and please don't breathe the same air. And in the second breath, it can be, mommy, I so need you and thank you for being there. And so now I will show you the ultimate way that it fits together. This is a map of the New York City subway system, okay? So I don't know anybody else that uses this model. But here's the way that you can think about it. Everything is interconnected, all right? That all of the subway system is interconnected. There is a larger pattern. But any one subway stop can get you anywhere. So the mystic is saying everything is interconnected, but at the same time, every moment is sacred. And so I thought that this was a great illustration of it, even if I do say so myself. For those of you that are former New Yorkers, you can feel nostalgic at the moment. So we go on to the first question. What's the nature of God? Isn't that a great picture? This is the image of the chariot. And so when we say the tefillah, people will take, before starting the tefillah, you'll see some people take 3 steps backward, 3 steps forward, and stand with their feet together. And the imagery is that of the angels who only had 1 leg. And these words, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Please forgive that I haven't changed the language to gender inclusive. The whole earth is full of God's glory. This is what we say in the Kedusha, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Now it's also interesting as an aside. At one point I took yoga lessons with a guy. Usually you need 200 hours. He was a 1,000-hour teacher. And we spent like a whole hour just talking about how you position your feet. And this vision of yoga was you put your feet together. Similarly with people who have a very classic ski form. So now we get to this idea that God was in the heavens, and above the firmament was the heads, was the likeness on a throne, the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the likeness of the throne as the appearance of a man upon it. So for the prophets, in Exodus, God says, no one can see me and live. And these are the visions that the prophets have. So these are all visions. They're not actually direct encounters with God, but it's visions of a chariot. And this type of mysticism is called Merkava mysticism, the mysticism of the chariot. This type of mysticism is also called the mysticism of the palace. And we ask then, how do I commune with God? So if people went up to God's presence, how do I do that? How do I recreate it? And this is where we get this is from the Apocrypha, which is after the Torah, and included in some Christian what's the word I'm looking for? Canons of the Bible. Ishmael said, when they ascended on high to behold the vision of the Merkabah, which is chariot, and it entered the 6th hall, one within the other. As soon as I reached the door to the 7th hall, I stood still in prayer before the holy blessed be he, lifting my eyes on high towards the divine majesty. And so they did this by study and by fasting and by prayer, and different chants and meditations. And last time we looked at the text of the 4 who entered Pardes and the dangers of this quest. So the last idea we really dealt with last week was, how did God create the world? And see, look, we covered 2,000 years in 5 minutes. So Sefer Yetzirah, which is the oldest book of Jewish mysticism, says that God used the letters of the Hebrew alphabet to create the world. And that's the concept. All the texts that I'm reading through are just illustrations, but you don't need to, worry about them. 22 letters are the foundation. He engraved them, he hewed them out, he combined them and set them at opposites. He formed them through, he formed through them everything that is formed and everything that is destined to be formed. Okay. And then we had these nice pictures, which are not so nice because they're out of focus, of micrography, which is a form of art where they use, so this is the entire book of Genesis in miniature calligraphy. And this is the entire book of Song of Songs in miniature calligraphy. A marvelous artist is Leon Azulai. That's where I bought my stuff from in Svat. And so now we're starting for today. And we are going to be making a huge leap, okay? And let's call it the willing suspension of disbelief, but everything we're going to do tonight is based on this transition in how the mystics saw the world. And I will show it to you very simply. I know that I'm on the right track because in the materials in the source book that I sent you, I found online a 45-minute lecture by Rabbi Larry Kushner, and he basically said the same thing. So if you don't want to come this week and next week, just go to Kushner. I really like Kushner. So an aside here, this is what I was told. Yeah, they're watching the Chicago 7 on Netflix. And Arnold Jacob Wolf was the radical of radicals on the left in the Reform movement. Tremendous intellectual, descendant from generations of rabbis. Larry Kushner was Arnold's fellow at one point at the synagogue. One point, Larry called up Arnold, and Arnold begins, "Kushner, whatever you did, I forgive you." Yeah, he was, Arnold was the Reform movement's answer to Andy Rooney. He had a large belly, and it was really a blessing for 6 months when I was the interim at KM Isaiah Israel. And the greatest honor was not just studying with him, which another rabbi and I did once a week, or visiting him in the office, but I was his driver. I was the balagala. So when he wanted to go to a meeting, and he would just throw out things sometimes, like when we were studying, and Arnold's wife brought over some cookies, he'd go, "Buber never gave us anything," because he spent time with Buber in Jerusalem. And he was also the secretary for A.J. Heschel when Heschel was at Hebrew Union College. So only one article, but he spoke like a curmudgeon. So I am told that while the trial was going on, that Arnold brought out, because Bobby Seale was chained and gagged, brought Kushner onto the bima chained and gagged. That is, somebody recounted that to me recently. And you know what? I could see that happening. And then I guess the judge was Jewish, and Arnold would bring Abby Hoffman to this, exclusive club in Chicago that both of them were members of. Great, let's roll back here. All right. So now here is the big shift. So up until now, the mystics have envisioned the relationship between God and the world in this way. that God is above. God's up in the heavens, and the world is below. God and the world are two separate beings. Okay. Now, the great shift of the mystic is to say that God pervades the world. Everything in the world is God. So that would be pantheism, but they, do it a little differently in what's called panentheism, where there is God, a little outside, and then everything is interconnected in the world. Okay. So that is the huge intellectual leap that we are making. Okay. Let me give you another way to understand it. Maybe, maybe not. The movie The Matrix. Anybody familiar with the movie The Matrix? Yeah, okay. Great film. Now, just, as a little sideline, when I was in Jerusalem for a year and we were studying a medieval mystical text called Shere Ora, we'd go down into this room, we called it the Kabbalah Cave. And the teacher was, just thrilled by the Matrix. So what I learned later on is that the Matrix is an analog to the life of Jesus. Think of the name, Anderson, okay? Oh, Anderson. Trinity, okay? Neo for new. I probably ruined the movie for you. So Neo in the regular world is a separate identity. But the reality of the world is this, that it's not separate, but it is actually a computer program where everything is interconnected, okay? So that's how all of this is working, okay? Did I like rock everybody's world? We'll see, okay. And then they go out of it, okay. So that is our beginning for tonight. Let me stop here and see if anyone has any questions or comments or rebuttals. Let me just pop this up. Great. I realized it was like taking a sip of water with a fire hose.
I have a question.
Sure.
What books do you suggest that somebody read by Larry Kushner?
The number one book for me is always Honey from the Rock, which is Kushner's first book. Yeah. It's really a classic because what he did was take the forms of mysticism and translate it into this book, and that's the one I go back to again and again. The same idea is expressed. This idea of everything being connected is expressed in his book called Invisible Lines of Connection. Now, Larry is a radical that everything is interconnected. Okay. For those of you that like the academics, it's called monism. Okay. I'm not there. I'm a reform mystic. I'm between I can talk to God and everything is interconnected. But that is just a wonderful book that puts it all together in a very poetic way with these ideas.
Thank you.
What you'll find at the back of the source book is a really newly updated bibliography of all kinds of works on Jewish either inspiration or mysticism or spiritual practice. And I put asterisk by the ones that seem to be, that they're some of my favorites anyway. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? So in philosophy class, I learned to ask two questions. The first question is, did I explain this in a way that is understandable? And then the second question is the critique. Do we like it, not like it? So is everybody with me at this point? So okay, Steve, how can I explain what are the missing pieces? Or were you waving that you were with me?
Oh, no, I was signaling that I'm with you so far.
Okay, great.
May not be buying it, but I'm understanding it.
Yeah. So you don't have to buy it. Okay. What we're really working to is this magnificent piece I'm going to show you next week. But it would not make sense without, believe me, without all of this background. And when people find out what mysticism is, not everybody, it's really not everybody's cup of tea. And if you think you're not buying it now, wait till later in the evening. It's going to get worse. I promise you. But here's the thing. In order to do what this, spiritual practice in this area, to me, it's important to have the foundation. Now, not everybody functions that way, but that's just the way my mind works. And as you can see, I take everything at the same time, both seriously and with a grain of salt. That's what makes it fun. Okay. Give me a moment here to enlarge so that this is readable by everybody.
What is the name of the calligrapher?
His name is Leon Azoulay. I think it's Azoulay.
Thank you.
If you Google him, he has a website. And you can get his stuff in the States. Okay. So here is the first text that is going to show that I'm just not making all of this stuff up. Okay. Now, this text comes from the Sfat Emet, or Sfas Emes, as he would be said in Ashkenazi. He's one of the Hasidic rabbis. And now what the rabbis would do, like I said last week, is on Shabbat, they would give their Shabbat talk, usually in Yiddish, and then their students afterwards would write it all down. The Gerer sect is the largest Hasidic sect. Okay. And this is a letter that he's sending to his grandchildren. The proclamation of oneness that we declare each day in saying, "Hear, O Israel," and so forth, needs to be understood as it truly is. That which is entirely clear to me based on the holy writings of the Kabbalists, I am obligated to reveal to you. The meaning of Yud He Vav He is not that he is the only God, negating other gods, though this is true, but the meaning is deeper, that there is no being other than him. This is true, even though it seems otherwise to most people. Everything that exists in the world, spiritual and physical, is God himself. So let's go back up to our picture. This was last week's God. This week's God. Everything in the world is God. And we're going to see how this gets manifest. Let me do one more text and then pause. The essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Since it causes everything to be, no thing can live by anything else. It enlivens them. Its existence exists in each extant. Realize rather that Ein Sof, meaning the ultimate unknowable part of God, exists in every extant, everything. Do not say this is a stone and not God. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. Let's see what's next. Okay. All right. Let me stop there and see if we've rocked anybody's world. When I first started learning this stuff, man, it took me a long way to get my head around it.
But isn't that what we do every day? Like everybody looks up at nature and says, oh, look what God created. So don't we always think of him as being everywhere?
Well, this is more than that. This is saying that the tree and the mountain are God.
As opposed to what?
Excuse me?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to God being up in the heavens and God creating the tree.
So that's the difference.
That's the difference.
Okay, thanks.
It seems to me there's a lot of evil in the world.
Uh-huh.
And can you say that that is also God?
We're going to get there. You're not going to like the answer.
So bringing it to modern times, it would be a good reason for climate and environmental change and control.
Yeah, well, that if everything is God, you know, we have a mandate to take care of everything in the world. Okay, everybody is with me. Nobody has gotten freaked out yet. Mind you, you know, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I'm back. I'm buying that part.
Okay.
No trouble with that.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, and Larry Kushner, you know, presents this idea in just a magnificent, magnificent way. I mean, his stuff is just poetic and really beautiful. I just like listening to him talk. I mean, I really have the greatest regard for Larry. So, okay, let me, so now, yeah, go ahead. Did you have a question?
Comment, of course, God is male. Everything's male.
Yeah, well, it's yes and no. Because what Danny Matt does a wonderful lecture called The Divine Feminine. And so what's happening in mysticism is actually a merger between male and female. And the manifestation of God in the world is Shekhinah, which is a feminine word.
Yeah.
And this idea of Shekhinah actually dates to the Talmud. So I like going on a Shekhinah hunt every once in a while. Toby, I'll get you in just a sec.
Okay.
So it's fun to look in the sources to see where Shekhinah appears. So Shekhinah appears over the bed of a sick person, or when a person gives tzedakah, or when a wedding couple unite together.
Wow.
And these are not, traditional male purviews. Toby.
When, okay, if God is in everything, then when a person or anything dies, is that somehow diminishing God?
Well, it's not diminishing God, because God is still flowing through everything. And in mysticism, there is the idea of reincarnation.
Of the soul.
So since reincarnation is a part of this stream of Jewish life, then there's no diminishment. And remember, think of this as like in literature, we have genres: romance, mystery, etc. This is a genre of Jewish literature. Okay. I like reading this stuff. I really enjoy it. Okay. All right, let's do just a little more of these texts. All right. So this was actually the first text I think I ever learned. And let me just give it a way of explaining. So classic mysticism is what they call Kabbalah, is the medieval period. And that's like computer programming. Hasidic thought is like Windows. That where there were 10 levels in the tree of life in mysticism, what happens in Hasidic thought is there's a top and a bottom. So it's made very accessible for the average person. Great. So here's a neat text. Consider the blessed Creator fills the whole world with glory. God Shekhinah is ever with me, subtle as can be. God is ruler over all things in the world and can bring about all that I desire. Therefore, it is right that I trust only God. Be joyous always, having full faith that the Shekhinah is with you, guarding you. The blessed Creator is present in every one of your limbs. You are looking at God as God is looking at you. God could do anything, even destroy all the worlds in a single moment and recreate them in another. All forces, both good and ill, are rooted in God. Everything contains the divine flow and life force. I trust and fear only the blessed God. Okay, let's unpack that, my friends. Want me to read it again, or let me put it up again and look at it again. Like I say, this stuff is not for the faint.
Takeaway again?
Excuse me?
Will you do the takeaway after you read it? Remember last week you did the takeaway is.
Yeah, sure.
Good.
Consider that the blessed Creator fills the whole earth with glory. God Shekhinah, inner presence, is ever with me, subtle as can be. God is ruler over all things in the world and could bring about all that I desire. Therefore, it is right that I trust God. Be joyous always, having full faith that the Shekhinah is ever with you, guarding you. The blessed presence, the blessed Creator is present in every one of your limbs. Now, that's a line that really strikes me. Imagine just, sensing that God, the God energy is pervading all of your being. The rest is just bonus. You're looking at God as God is looking at you. God can do anything God wants, even destroy worlds in a single moment. And this is really important. All forces, both good and ill, are rooted in God. Everything contains the divine flow and life force. So, what's the takeaway? The takeaway, let's go back to the two circles that we had earlier. So, what is significant about this is that mystical thought has redefined God. And God is not just outside of us, either interacting directly or not directly, or letting the world go, but God is pervading all of the world. And everything that comes after what we're talking about now is going to flow from this idea that everything in the world is God. Okay. So that things are all interconnected. Now there's a, there are some things that are really nice about this idea, but some things that are a little troubling. Let's see.
So the first thing that pops into my head is, does that excuse people to be not to be accountable for their own actions?
Yeah.
You know, kind of the be it God's will excuse.
It can, and that's the danger of this. But but the reality is, we're still bound by halacha. So, you're only supposed to be reading this if you're observing the commandments. So that provides the fail-safe.
So, the big thing is explain the Holocaust.
That's the problem. And we'll get into that text in a second. So yeah, like I said, this is the dark side of this stuff. And it's the stuff that people who teach this stuff don't always like to talk about. So let's, is everybody with me in terms of clarity? Okay. All right. As you can see, hopefully my enthusiasm is coming through. I really like a lot of this stuff. There's some parts I don't like, but I also feel it's important that I not hide things from people. All right.
I would hope not. Why would you hide it?
Well, some people don't talk about it.
Shut up.
All right. So let me do, maybe somebody else would like to read this. And this is a nice way that Kushner presents it. This is a book for children and teens. So if somebody would like to read the first two paragraphs.
I'll do it.
Great.
Each generation is linked to the next by its actions. We depend on those who come before us, just as someday our children will depend on us. For this reason, all the generations are connected to one another. In the same way generations are linked, we are also connected to all the people around us. When the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness, they carried a portable temple called the Mishkan, the wilderness tabernacle. When the work of the Mishkan was finally completed, the Torah says that the tabernacle was one. Rabbi Mordechai Yosef of the Polish town Ishbitz thought that this was an odd thing to say about a building. Perhaps, he suggested, that the Torah is not telling us something about the building, but about its builders and how they worked.
If somebody else would like to go on. Unmute, Lynn.
Okay. While building the Mishkan, all the children of Israel worked as a team. Each person contributing only one small part felt as important as every other person. After the Mishkan was completed, they saw how their individual tasks fit together, as if one person had constructed the whole thing. Realizing how they had depended on one another, they understood that the tabernacle was one. Even the person who made the holy ark itself realized he was no more important than the person who made only the courtyard tent pegs. Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
We are joined, therefore, not only to people who have lived long before us and who will live after we have died, but to people now living, to people we do not know. Invisible lines of depending are everywhere, as if millions of glistening threads tie us to the universe and the universe to us. Nothing is ever detached alone. We are all parts of one great living organism.
Good, and somebody else would finish it off.
Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher who taught in Germany and later in Israel, believed that nothing was more important than the relationship between two people. They can be members of the same family or sometimes even complete strangers. When two individuals realize that they depend on one another, that they are connected to one another, that they have a relationship with one another, then they have come closer to God. Buber imagined that the invisible lines of relation which joined them to one another also joined them to God. We are all joined to one another, and that all joined togetherness is an important part of God. When we say the Shema, that God is one, we are saying that everything and everyone is connected. And the more we look at our world, the more we realize that it is made according to a master plan, a blueprint.
Thoughts? Isn't that lovely?
It is a beautiful text. It really is.
That's why I like Kushner.
Like this much better than the last text.
Yeah. You know, he has brought this tradition into the modern idiom. And, you know, I don't know anybody that really has done it as well. So let me do, I have to do that tomorrow. So let me give a commercial for the other person that I think is in different ways on par with Kushner, you know, in the sense of really being an original thinker. And that's Rabbi Karen Kadar. And she has written wonderful poetry, wonderful pieces like this piece just by Larry, and you know, a lot of people are sort of subsidiary of one another, but Karen is really, you know, original thinker and poet, and we're going to have the good fortune of having her do 3 sessions with us in the spring. Yeah, so yeah, she's really, really quite extraordinary.
I've actually heard her speak, and I have one of her books. She's really terrific.
Yeah. And yeah, as you see, that's part of what I view as my greater mission of just planting seeds. Think of me as a bee pollinating from different flowers in the Jewish world.
How do you spell her last name?
Kedar, and her first name is Karyn. Her latest book is Amen, which is a book of poetry, which is wonderful. I think she's done 5 books. And they're all really, I haven't read all of them, look, let's be honest. The ones I've read are really, really lovely. So this is Larry saying the same thing, but in nice words, that we feel this, interconnection through all of the generations. And that's why people like this stuff so much. Great. We're all together on the same page? Good. Now I think I may, with the next one, make everybody unhappy. So now, as they say, we come to the dark side. And this is the issue of the Holocaust. And this is where I get off the mysticism train to a degree. Or at least I get off the train that Larry is driving. So when I studied for a year with a Chabad rabbi, and he was taking a group to March of the Living. And he was, a very firm believer in this God is everything, and that there can't be evil in the world. And therefore, the Holocaust can't be evil. And look, this was a wonderful guy. He got food cards for everybody, very kind. But that's where I get off the train. So here are two texts. The first one, Larry Kushner is quoting. I know you're not going to like Larry anymore. The next one is from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. The Baal Shem Tov taught that God is actually hidden within all evil and suffering, but that God only hides when people do not realize that God is there. Ultimately, there is no barrier between God and people except that of our own making. And if one succeeds in removing this barrier, then all evil is revealed to be an illusion. So in Hasidic literature, there are these two terms, katnut, from katan, which means diminished consciousness, and gadlut, which is expanded consciousness. So if you think of, I really don't like this stuff, this part of the stuff. So I'm trying to explain it as graciously as I can. So think of the country mouse and the city mouse. The city mouse only sees a field being dug up. The country mouse sees the whole picture. And that's what Kushner is saying here. The next one. Let me read that again, then we'll go to the next one. The Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of Hasidism, taught that God is actually hidden within all evil and suffering, but that God only hides when people do not realize that God is there. Ultimately, there is no barrier between God and people except that of our own making. And if one succeeds in removing this barrier, then all evil is revealed to be an illusion. Ik. Basically, our pain from the anguish, suffering, and ordeals we experience, heaven forbid, is solely because we are diminished in mind. That's katnut. So that we do not consider the ultimate purpose, which is holy good. For if we consider the purpose, we'd realize that our sufferings are not evil at all, but great goods. Let me stop there to see if anybody is willing to accept this. I don't want to make anybody upset by, anyway.
Who could possibly accept that?
Excuse me?
Who could possibly accept that? It's like the Germans could have used that as a great source of why they did a good thing.
Yeah.
Really, it's crazy.
Uh-huh.
What about
So if
free
you-
will?
Yeah.
What about free will and that people within themselves have evil and
Yeah.
they choose evil?
Mm-hmm.
So where is God in that choice?
Yeah.
Because in any moment we can choose how to be.
Mhm.
I just keep thinking that it goes back to the Orthodox or the Hasidic of everything is God's will, and I just can't subscribe to that.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
big-
yeah. Well, those are two different things. Let me differentiate. That um, the Hasidic world is a subsection of the Orthodox world. So not all Orthodox Jews, as most Orthodox Jews, don't subscribe to this.
Right.
So that it's all God's will is more, a fundamentalist mainstream Orthodox belief. When I was in Long Island and we'd go to the mikveh there, the mikveh lady believed that. She was just a nice lady. She believed it's God's will.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie. And then,
So can you, is this the kind of thing where you either believe in the mysticism stuff or you don't? I mean, I don't see how you can sort of believe it then. Anybody could be halfway this, because either you believe all this crazy or you don't. I mean, it didn't seem as crazy till now. Now it's like, oh my God, what's the matter with these people?
Yeah. So let me answer this question, and then Toby, I'll go to you. So there are two answers. Art Green talks about this as psychospiritual literature. And so we're reading it more as poetry than as prose. And that's one way to read it. I was doing an 8-day silent meditation retreat. Every other day you had a period with either one of the leaders or one-on-one or in a group. And so we had, our group of 6 was meeting with the guy in charge. His name was David Cooper, Rabbi David Cooper. And David Cooper was just, man, he was as hardcore on this as one could possibly be. And someone said, raised these questions, and he basically said, if you can't handle this, you probably shouldn't be too close to me. So when I had my turn to speak, I said, look, I'm here and here. I'm about 85% that everything's connected, but I'm 15% that I can talk to God. And I like being, that in-between voice. And so basically I completely shot the legs out of everything that he was trying to indoctrinate us with. And at the end of the retreat, 3 of the people came up to me and said, oh, I'm so glad you said that. So, I can believe that there's an interconnection with things and a power in the world. But at the same time, I reject this idea that there's hidden good in the Holocaust. And that's, again,
Phrase.
yeah, well, it's, there are people that hold.
I can't get that at all.
Yeah, and so I'm willing to take different pieces. And I'll, and Toby, pardon me, but I'll bring it to the next level on how this works. That in the theory of faith development, we have moral development with Piaget, we have intellectual development with Piaget, we have moral development with Kohlberg, and then there's a theory of faith development. And I like the ideas of Gabriel Moran, who basically says, look, there are different phases we go through with our faith is how we organize the world. When you're young, you are in my people's religion. We're speaking, and we hear our parents' words coming out of our mouths. We're possessed by a Dybbuk. And then in adolescence, we come to disbelief. That, and Carrie, I just want to apologize because I don't want to in any way diminish how strongly you feel. Because I also feel this is very upsetting. And disbelief doesn't mean that you don't have any belief, but you see the flaws in the system that came before you. And then the next level is parabolic faith. You know, a parable is a story where you could interpret it differently. And so, you know, where I go with all of this is on that level, finding parts that are really moving to me, and then just ignoring the parts I don't like. But I don't think that I would be fair to anybody if I didn't show you this stuff. And, you know, for me, I can, again, I can take but there are people that will say, man, that's enough. Yee. So, so Toby, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that the idea that God is in everything, including what we consider evil, would be the basis of the folks who say, and there were some, that the Holocaust was kind of God's roundabout way of leading to the state of Israel. That without the Holocaust, we wouldn't have the state of Israel, which would follow from what you're saying here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I have a perspective to share. I don't think that it's at all a question of everything being, I had to make notes on this. The way I think about this is so interconnected and cyclical that I had to write it down in order. I don't think it's a question of everything being God's will or not, but that God is both forces, good and evil. If God, you know, kind of in a cosmic sense, if it's everything, if God is everything, God somehow contains both forces, because everything contain, you know, here in the world of everything, there are both forces. Yeah. And I think of these forces as in kind of an eternal existential struggle of one versus the other that plays out practically in our lives as the choices we make individually and as a society, always has been, is now, always will be, as long as it all exists. And that it's like a continuum, you know, if time is not simply moving from here to here, but it's this continuum of forever making these choices, which is, you know, one of the very first Jewish teachings I, as a convert, encountered prior to converting, this idea that, so I was raised Catholic, and this idea that just completely blew up the notion of original sin, is that no, you're not born evil, you're born neutral, and your life is a path of choosing between good and evil. So when I think about where's the good in the Holocaust, it's not that I think God is somehow hidden in a way that makes the Holocaust good. It's evil, but we said evil is within God. You know, we already said that God's both good and evil. So not exactly those words, far more poetic, mystical ones. And that what the Holocaust at least does for the future on, and we would all rather it not have happened because it's evil, is that we saw what completely banal, you know, often unemotional, cold, matter-of-fact extinguishment, that's not a word, but extermination of life, the antithesis of God being the creation of life is. And for those of us who today, for example, are moved enough by and moved enough to speak out about and compare to the Holocaust things like racism and anti-Semitism, anti-immigration, beliefs and policies are often comparing to that is, it's like this big stop sign, go no further. We don't want to do that because that is pure evil. And I also am reminded of an analogy a friend told me once when I was asking what he thought of this notion of God's will versus free will. And he said, it's as if God created the world and took his hands off the wheel.
Yeah.
And if God is us and we are God, it's our hands on the wheel. So that is our free choice, and our free choice is God's free choice, and it's always happening. Was that as clear as mush?
No, it makes sense to me.
I thought that put things into a really good perspective for me too, Susan. I thought that was really good.
Thank you.
What you were saying before, Rabbi Crystal, or what you read before, I should say, made it sound like the people who were killed in the Holocaust were to blame in some way, that they weren't connected enough, that they weren't holy enough, that they weren't deserving enough. And that just really rubs me the wrong way. You know, it's blaming the victim that they weren't pure enough. So I like yours a whole lot better.
Yeah. I would suggest that it's not that they weren't pure enough in this belief. It's that there is some hidden reason that we just can't see. Is how I would explain it.
Yeah, see, I think that the Holocaust changed everything.
Yeah.
And so all this that was written before that, really, come on, because, and the problem is it could happen again. So I just don't get that at all. But okay, you know, I mean, it's interesting, but I really could stop right now and never hear any more about this. That's how angry I am. Really, I'm insane. I'm blowing my head apart here. I can't. It's really insane. But
and I feel,
and it's all men. I mean, you know, I think maybe if women had something to do with it, they may have said, "Wait, that's insane." But okay.
Yeah, it's it is really, really upsetting stuff. I will tell you that I think where we'll come to next week is better. And it's a place that I think is a good place. But
How can yeah, okay, you can say that, but you know, like, I'm so glad I took this, because now I never have to think about this again, because with this dark underside, I don't see how for me, it blows my mind and just colors everything about it.
yeah. And that's why a lot of people don't like mysticism. Yeah, once they learn what's really there. So I have a piece that's going to make you feel much better. Let me take a look here. And then I may jump to this piece, which will hopefully redeem a little bit of this for you, a very profound piece. So another concept along this is called Machshavot Zerot, strange thoughts. One must believe that the whole world is filled with God's presence. There's no place empty with God. All human thoughts have within them the reality of God. When a strange or evil thought arises in a person's mind while he is engaging in prayer, it is coming to that person to be repaired and elevated. So, I don't like it. Okay, so let me share with you a piece that I think puts things together in a really amazing way. Okay, and then I'll tell you about where. Oops, give me a second here. Let me just stop share. A second. Okay. So I think this is a lovely, lovely piece that hopefully might redeem some of this for you. So if somebody would like to read this. Okay, you'd like me to read it. When you're asking for opinions about God, you're bound to find countless answers. Each person's being slightly different. Some people believe that God is an omnipotent being that created us and watches over us. Some believe that God created man, stepped back, and is watching his creation work its way through its existence. Others don't believe that a God exists. I, however, have an entirely different belief. I believe in God, but I also believe in scientific principle and find it hard to believe that a physical being can be around us all the time. I believe that and again, this was written before people used gender inclusive language. This was written over 20 years ago. I believe that all men have souls that make up who they are, and God is an invisible connection between those souls, connecting all men and women on earth. The way I see a soul, like I see God, isn't as a tangible object, but a facet of our minds that tells us what is right and wrong and shapes who we are. Some people believe that God controls what we do, and in a way, so do I. I feel that God is the common link that makes up the good and bad in all of us. Since I believe that God is the eternal connection that binds us together through right and wrong, God does in a way control our actions. He makes good things happen because he is the essence of good. He makes bad things happen because he is the essence of our bad. I found that people, even those who don't usually believe in God, find themselves praying to him in times of need. And I feel that when I pray to God, I'm praying to that fabric of good, evil, and eternity that binds us all. The Torah teaches us that man was created in God's image, but it never says God's physical image. Perhaps, let's say humans, reflects God in the sense that all of our souls are connected by God, by this universal knowledge of right, wrong, good, and evil, that we sometimes call omnipotent, sometimes call a myth, and always call God. Wow, do we like that one better?
Yeah, it seems like more of a free will thing, right?
Well, it's, taking some of these ideas, everything is interconnected, but, putting it in a context of it's all there, and good and evil, and it's sort of a little beyond what we can know, but everything being connected. Do we like that one better? Okay. Yeah. So let me tell you about the author. The author was 16 years old. Wow. Yeah, that was one of my confirmation students. And that, tears come to my eyes that, because we do, we did this program I do about Jewish ideas of God. And for a 16-year-old to come up with that, he's probably close to 40 now. Man, that was like, whoa, stop here. If I have done nothing else, my mission in the world has been fulfilled.
Wait, does he still feel that way? Or has he changed in 30 years?
Oh, I imagine he has.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if he still thinks that way.
Yeah, I mean, this was a student in in New York, and I don't. There's nobody there that I'm in touch with at this point. It's been a long time. So, but and so I'll let me share another idea about how this stuff can be psychospiritual literature. So the question of people that are evil, that do evil, terrible things. And Harold Kushner, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People, his take on people like this is that in the same way that people have a physical disability, people have a moral disability. And that's the way that he explained it. And I was listening to, this book on tape, and I can still tell you where I was. I was on the Southern State Parkway right next to Valley Stream. And yes, New Yorker, you know that I was stuck in traffic. And I thought, wow, that sounds really good. But then I was in a session with Art Green. And Art Green described it this way. And this is what I mean using mysticism as psychospiritual literature. He said that the essence of our being is light and is good, but that shards get built around it, a husk, a shell, which becomes thicker and thicker and thicker in the world. And that people who do evil things are doing them because this shell has blocked them from their inner self. Now, man, there are still people doing terrible things in the world, but I find that much more hopeful.
Wait, is this Art Green a mysticism? A mystic?
No? Yeah, Art Green is, we're gonna read this piece by him next week. So Art is a wonderful, wonderful man. Art was educated at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and he studied with Heschel. He was the president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and then he went to be the head of the equivalent, it's Near Eastern or whatever, Jewish studies, the equivalent of Jewish studies at Brandeis. And now he's the rector of the rabbinic program at Hebrew College in Boston. And Art is deeply versed in Hasidic thought. And if anyone is familiar with the Jewish Catalog series, let's all date ourselves, that comes from a group a little over 50 years ago called Chavarat Shalom in Boston. And two of the inspirations for that group were Art and Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who comes out of the Hasidic world, Reb Zalman. And so Art is, and Larry Kushner studied with Art. So Art is very much in the same vein as Larry, but he has a much, much deeper knowledge of the primary sources. And in the bibliography are several of Art's books. And he just did a lecture which I can put up for folks. I can give you a link to it. I haven't listened to the lecture yet. And when Art speaks, I just feel this love for the soul of the Jewish people when Art is talking. So this idea of the husks being built up is something that I take much more comfort in. I relate to it also because, when I first became senior rabbi in New York, it must have been the first year or the second year, I was in a car accident where somebody crossed the double line and hit me head on. There was no place to go to. It was on windy roads. It's deeply troubling because he didn't get out of his car and check how I was. He was calling his wife when I went to check how he was. But my sternum was fractured, very hairline fractures in 2 places. And it's not that's the moment when I began, I was always growing in certain directions, but that's just, struck me as a, kind of a realignment moment relating to that idea. So where are we holding? How is everybody feeling at the moment?
I still can't get over the Holocaust thing. That's it for me. It's like, no, thank you. If you're into mysticism and you believe this, then no, thank you.
Yeah.
So obviously, I can't understand how they can get their heads around that at all.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of people, once they find this out, hear this, they find the door.
I would think any rational person would.
Yeah. But stay with us for one more week because you're going to see.
Oh, I am, because it's interesting, but I'm glad I didn't get my red bracelet.
Yeah. You'll see how art puts this together in what I find is a truly remarkable way.
Isn't that whitewashing the whole thing?
No, it's not whitewashing it.
All right. Because there it is. So, all right.
Yeah. But you'll see how art deals with this. And he doesn't excuse evil in the piece we're going to learn next week. We've got a little ways to go before we get there. So I want to bring you one other last piece, which again reflects some of this frustration with this belief that about evil in the world. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, like a 3rd generation Hasidic master. And he was the Hasidic master. Yeah, it's like they called, in the movie Patton, there's a general they call the GI General. And he's the every person's Rabbi. So there's a story of someone who was smoking on Shabbat. And Rabbi Levi Yitzhak goes up to him and says, do you know it's Shabbat? And he says, yes. And he says, do you know you're not supposed to smoke on Shabbat? He says, yes. And then Rabbi Levi Yitzhak says, Rabbanu Shalom, Master of the universe, how wonderful are your people. Even when they're sinning, they will not lie. That's Rabbi Levi Yitzhak. The work which I have in my office is called Kedushat Levi. I studied one of my Chavruta for 6 months, was somebody who was like a 16th generation descendant. Good morning to you, Lord, Master of the universe. I, Levi Yitzhak, son of Berdichev, I come to you with a Din Torah from your people Israel. A Din Torah is a legal challenge. What do you want of your people Israel? What do you demand of your people Israel? Everywhere I look, it says, say to the children of Israel. Every other verse says, speak to the children of Israel. And over, command the children of Israel. Father, sweet Father in heaven, how many nations are there in the world? A tremor passed through the auditorium, scattered sighs and muffled sobs were heard. And when he began to thunder, Persians, Babylonians, Edomites, the Russians, what do they say? That their czar is the only ruler. The Prussians, what do they say? Their Kaiser is supreme. In the English, what do they say? George III is sovereign. And I, Levi Yitzhak, son of Berdichev, say, Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbi. It's the Kaddish. Magnified and sanctified is thy name. And I, Levi Yitzhak, son of Berdichev, say, from my stand I will not waver, and from my place in I will not move until there be an end to all this. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbi. Magnified and sanctified is only thy name. And this piece, it's called the Kaddish of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, is how Rabbi Levi Yitzhak is dealing with this same paradox. He sees the evil in the world. He believes that everything is interconnected. He's arguing with God because everything is connected, but he can still talk to God. And it's just, in front of the whole congregation, just throwing out there the paradox, but saying, my feet are still here. And that's why I think it is really magnificent and powerful and upsetting. Read a little Larry Kushner, you'll feel good. Larry has, but understand that that the where a lot of what Larry is talking about is based on this concept of God is everything in the world. That's it feels good until it doesn't. Any other last thoughts or questions or comments? Everybody with me okay? Okay.
A couple of things I have.
It's
First thing, Rabbi, I appreciate so much you, and I appreciate everyone, chiming in on this and talking about God. We don't get to do that much, and it's really, really important to hash this over together. So the second thing is, I was always moved long ago by Bernstein's Third Symphony Kaddish, which is very much in the same Din Torah.
Yeah. I'll kind of share with you, kind of final last piece. When I was in New York, my eye doctor was a member of the congregation. He's a marvelous, marvelous man. And he passed away at an early age, a little before I left. And, I used to say that when you went to see Marty, first he'd check your eyes, then he'd examine your soul. And when we were at the Shiva house, a friend of his who was a Holocaust survivor who had to wear a whole brace thing because his spine had been disintegrating, was really saying to me, look at what I lived through and why and what happened with Marty. And there weren't words there. That was just the time to give him a hug. So some things really transcend and just make us really angry. And it's what we're doing to, in this quest to find a way to put things all together. If you want to feel better, you could begin reading Art's piece. It's towards the end, but it'll make more sense if you wait. But it depends. Let me just take a look here at the materials, and I'll find some nice things for you to read that I might have put in there. Okay, so let's end with this nice piece by Larry, which we may come back to next week about interconnectedness. This is from Honey from the Rock. And there must have been a time when you entered a room and met someone, and after a while you understood that unknown to either of you, there was a reason that you had met. You had changed the other, or he had changed you. By some word or deed, or just by your presence, the errand had been completed. Then perhaps you were a little bewildered or humbled and grateful, and it was over. Each lifetime is the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. For some, there are more pieces. For others, the puzzle is more difficult to assemble. Some seem to be born with a nearly completed puzzle, and so it goes. Souls going this way and that, trying to assemble the myriad parts. But know this, no one has within themselves all the pieces of their puzzle. Like before the days when they used to seal jigsaw puzzles in cellophane, ensuring that all the pieces were there. Everyone carries with them at least one and probably many pieces to someone else's puzzle. Sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. And when you present your piece, which is worthless to you, to another, whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not, you are a messenger of the Most High. So that's the nice side of this, and that's why I feel happy taking the parts I like and just ignoring and rejecting the parts I don't. To me, it took me a long time to get there to be able to do that, but yeah, that's what it is.
Sorry, what was the source of the thing you just read?
Oh,
That was from Honey from the Rock,
Oh, okay, great.
available on Kindle on Amazon.com.
Right.
And still in print, I believe. I think that's Kushner's best book. Great. Chalamot, pause everyone, have golden dreams, and we'll see you next week.